Appreciate the opportunity, and hello, everyone.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Okay, so just before we get started, I'll just give you a quick summary of what we have planned for you over the next 55 minutes or so. So Craig's going to be kicking us off with an introduction to the SiriusDecisions campaign framework, giving us an overview, and then talking a little bit about how the framework can help from a budget alignment perspective. Once Craig's been through that, I'll pick up and I'll share with you how Allocadia can help you operationalize the framework, specifically focusing around marketing budgeting. Then we'll discuss a few of the key takeaways, and then we'll have hopefully 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of time at the end for Q&A. So I'd very much encourage you to make this interactive. It makes it more interesting for everybody. So we're using GoToWebinar for the event today. So there's a questions panel. If you type in any questions, they'll come through to us, and my colleague Brittany will moderate the questions, and then either I'll answer them or ask Craig to address the questions. So I really encourage you to send any questions you have as we go through the material across to us. If you do have any technical difficulties today, email Brittany. You see Brittany's email address at the bottom of the slide there, and we'll do our utmost to assist you. Okay, Craig, so I'm just going to hand over control to you and take it away.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if we can get the mouse to click right here.
Success.
There we go. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to take you through the campaign framework. So this framework was developed to help marketers do a better job of planning their campaigns and then to operationalize them. And part of that planning process is alignment with the budget planning and the budget execution. And so that's a key part of what we're going to talk about today. So what we're dealing with is marketers that are often working with misaligned reputation, demand creation, and sales enablement activities. And what this does is this creates this inefficiency in the way in which marketing operations execute their go-to-market initiatives. It creates waste in terms of your financial resources, and it creates waste in terms of the human capital that's involved in running a number of these different activities. So what we're, actually looks like we've advanced the slide here. So what we're going to do is take you through this campaign planning framework to show you how it can help you manage and avoid some of this waste. And then we'll talk specifically about some of the budget planning and execution activities that you can do to help run your campaigns effectively. So coming out of this, hopefully you will have a chance to see some of the challenges that we face with our current approaches to going to market, some of the current campaign wisdom. And then we'll look at the 5 elements of the SiriusDecisions campaign framework model. And then we'll talk about budget execution strategy and some of the characteristics of it's being implemented in technology. So let me take you through some of the examples of what we find marketers doing today, because some of this might resonate with you. And what we find is that in many cases marketers are developing marketing campaigns, but the term campaign means different things to many different people. And so here's some of the things that we hear. We'll hear, well, we're running a campaign for product X. Well, our view of the world is that a campaign should be focused on buyers' needs and not individual products. Fundamentally, buyers have a need to solve a business problem. They don't have a need for your product. And so from our perspective, running a product campaign is really not a campaign. We also see people say, well, we're running a campaign for a white paper, running an asset-based campaign. And our perspective is that an asset is part of a tactic. It's really a pretty low-level component of the overall strategy behind campaigns. And so it's almost upside down to look at it from this perspective. And if you're out building assets and then trying to run promotional activities around it, then it's probably not very well coordinated. So our perspective is that's not a campaign. And sometimes we work with marketing organizations that are running many tactics simultaneously. We call this the tactical treadmill. This environment where they're running hundreds and maybe thousands of campaigns in a period of time. And from a planning perspective, they don't necessarily see a big problem. What they have is a resource problem. And from our perspective, that's really not a campaign. We also see marketers heavily focused on demand creation as the sole element of their go-to-market initiatives, and our perspective is that demand creation is a really important part, but it's not everything. And so when we see an organization that's primarily focused just on doing demand generation, demand creation activities, what we like to try to do is introduce the alignment with sales around sales enablement and more effective reputation-based activities. So demand creation by itself is not really a campaign. And sometimes we find organizations that are organized and budgeted in silos. So each different department has its own marketing plan and its own go-to-market initiatives, and often they'll be running a number of activities simultaneously that really aren't in cadence. They're not choreographed together, and from the customer's perspective, it can create a real challenge because you're getting mixed messages, you're getting maybe too many messages, and so it can create a bit of frustration from the prospect's point of view, and it's certainly hard to manage from a management leadership perspective. So that's not a campaign. So I've given you a number of examples of what campaigns aren't. What I'd like to do now is to show you what we define a campaign to be. And first is that a campaign is based on a buyer's need. It's a business need. It's not the products that you're selling. It's not the solutions. It's based on the fundamental buyer's need. And a campaign is a roll-up of 4 separate program families. And within those program families are the tactics that you execute. These program families are reputation, demand creation, sales enablement, and market intelligence. And inside these program families are the individual tactics that you execute. And these tactics really take 5 forms. They're what we essentially call jobs that you do. And these jobs are seeding demand, creating demand, nurturing it, enabling the sales force, and accelerating deals in the pipeline. And so everything you do within the campaign falls into this category, these 5 core jobs, and they fit into the program families. Now, the 4th element of a campaign is it should run for a long period of time. And this is sometimes a little bit difficult for marketers to get past because they're used to running short, bursty promotional activities, primarily focused on driving demand, trying to feed the top of the funnel. Well, our perspective is that when you build campaigns focused on buyers' needs don't change very quickly. They evolve over time, certainly, but they're not changing month to month to month. And so as you build campaigns focused on buyers' needs, you can then take a long-term perspective and begin to design your reputation, demand creation, and sales enablement activities to support a series of tactics over the long term. So our perspective is that 12 months is the minimum period of time that you should run a campaign. And what that does, particularly in the context of today's webinar, is it sets up an environment where now you're building your campaigns that are aligned with the same kinds of cycles that budgets are managed by. So now you can begin to align your budgeting process with your campaign planning process and start taking a much more strategic approach to how you want to invest in the different aspects of the campaign. And finally, campaigns, since they're not focused on products but they're focused on buyers' needs, you're now going to start taking all the products across your organization, aligning them to separate buyers' needs, and then mapping them into different campaigns. The only way to do this is through what we call an interlock process. That means that you're working with your sales organization and you're working with your product organization and you're working with all the different silos in marketing to collaborate around building these needs-oriented campaigns. So these are the 5 elements of a campaign. And what I'll do now is dive into a little bit more detail about each of those. So first, campaigns are based on buyers' needs, and as you build out campaigns, what you do is you take these fundamental buyers' needs, which are really business issues. They're about driving revenue, driving profitability, managing cost. These are the reasons that they're actually making a decision to purchase something, purchase your solutions, your services. And what we do from a campaign design perspective is we build a theme. And the theme is an articulation of the buyer's needs in the context of what it is that you have to offer to help address their issues. And what we find is that needs come in 2 flavors. They come in a need for, so it's a need for things like greater uptime on a website, which we use as an example in this presentation, or a need for greater security, a need for greater reliability, perhaps even a need for lower cost. But there's another kind of need that's out there that's interesting, and it really affects the way you design your campaigns, and that's what we call a need to do. And these are generally compliance-oriented needs. They are often industry-motivated or they're government-motivated, and they're forcing a buyer to take action. And essentially these buyers are now automatically, sort of by definition, in the buying cycle because they now have to take some action, usually by a specific deadline, to solve this problem, to address this compliance issue. So when you look at buyers and you look at their needs in the context of these 2 forms, it really can help you design your campaigns overall. Now, a campaign, as I said, is a roll-up of programs and tactics, and so what these program families are is reputation, and what we define reputation to be is image, awareness, thought leadership, other your brand activities, all designed to be focused around this core theme. Demand creation consists of your sourcing demand, but also nurturing demand, so the long-term and the pre-marketing qualified lead nurturing activities you do to manage the demand before you hand the leads off to the sales organization. The third element is sales enablement. Sometimes this is a little bit new to marketing organizations because often sales enablement is often the sales organization and maybe not closely aligned with the marketing function. So part of the challenge of the marketing campaign implementation is to make sure that you're aligned with sales enablement and to coordinate across organizations. And then finally, since you're running these campaigns for a long period of time, you're not going to build many of them, they're just going to have a few, then we can reintroduce market intelligence to the campaign planning and execution process where we can begin to build an understanding of the buyers, understand how the messaging resonates with their perception of their needs, and begin to understand how competitors respond to your campaign activities, and perhaps even look internally to see how your own organization is responding to the campaigns. So then the tactics that you're used to running all sprinkle within these different program families like this. So if you have a thought leadership blog, well, that falls into the category of reputation. Some of the assets that you create and the things that you do like webinars and so forth are falling into the demand creation set of activities. And then the ROI tools you develop fall into sales enablement. So just at a high level, this categorization of the activities within a marketing campaign gives you this framework for beginning to plan and manage how you want to go forward. So this is a really nice tool for just looking at what you're planning on doing and how much it might cost. So you can begin to think about how your budgeting might align to this overall framework. Now, the next step in the campaign is looking at how the jobs apply to it, these different job families. And as I said, there's 5 different job types. So you're either seeding demand, which is what you do within the reputation program family, or you're creating and nurturing that demand. And then as you transition into what you're doing with sales enablement, you're either enabling the sales organization to help them sell more effectively, or you're doing specific activities that can help accelerate deals in the pipeline. And these are all activities that marketers are doing one way or the other in different parts of the organization. But that's just it. They're probably in different parts of the organization. And so as I said, part of the challenge of implementing and designing a campaign is this interlock process. So if you think about where these different job types may exist, they may exist in different departments of marketing and in some cases perhaps over in the sales organization. And so as you build a campaign, part of the alignment effort is to get these different groups to work together. So there's a bit of collaboration and interlock that's required to help build out your campaigns. So what I'd like to do here is just put it all together and to show you how a timeline, how the campaign runs over a timeline. So you can see that we've got the job types across the types. So across the top there's the 5 different job types in separate colors. And then the 4 program families, reputation, demand creation, sales enablement, and market intelligence, are shown horizontally, and then it's mapped across a 4-quarter time frame here. So what you might do is start your campaign with kicking off. You might, in reputation, start with some thought leadership initiatives. You might bring in influencers like industry analysts, or perhaps there's some thought leaders in the industries in which you're marketing, and have them come up to speed on what the campaign's all about, hold an analyst day. You might start advertising activities. You might have some inbound marketing activities that are really focused on education, helping drive your brand and awareness of the kinds of problems that you're solving and the reputation activities. And then you can begin to run those over a long period of time. So your planning effort would show this year-long horizon. You might identify the different sets of activities that you want to do, all aligned to this core theme. In demand creation, you might kick it off where you've got outbound marketing activities, perhaps running in 3 stages over the lifetime of the campaign, and then have inbound marketing activities that are going to run as a perpetual demand creation over the whole lifetime of the campaign. And then you could have your nurturing streams. So pre-marketing qualified lead nurturing, as well as recycled or long-term nurturing activities that you're doing to support the deals that fall out of the sales organization and need to go back into marketing. So these, again, are things you can plan for a long period of time and run over the lifetime of the campaign. Sales enablement, you might start with kicking it off with some sort of campaign training, open a sales portal, start doing early stage sales enablement activities like supporting the technical evaluation of your products, and then later stage enablement activities that could support things like configuration, pricing, perhaps ROI tools would fit into that. And then you could also have pipeline acceleration activities that you can do that can help support deals moving from one stage to the next in your sales pipeline. So as a marketer now, instead of looking at that tactical treadmill and worrying about the next tactic you're going to run, step back, look at what the sales pipeline looks like, look at the deals, see where they might be stuck at certain stages. Perhaps they're stuck at evaluation stage, and there's things that you can actually do to help move these buyers from one stage of understanding about the technical solution to another by perhaps opening a forum and giving them the ability to talk to customers and understand what it's like to be a customer in your environment, or perhaps case studies and user references that could help move a buyer from one stage to the next. And then along the bottom we have market intelligence, and the idea here is that you might do some primary research to understand buyers' needs and to test your messaging to make sure that it resonates with buyers' perception of their own needs and their own problems. And then as you respond to competitors in different time frames as your campaign begins to run, you might find that competitors are reacting to it, and there's things that you might want to do to course correct. So having market intelligence and investment in market intelligence to help understand and see that and respond to it is very important. And then finally, since you're running for a long period of time, one of the key alignments with the campaign framework itself is with the sales organization. And so understanding how the sales organization is responding and utilizing the resources of the campaign, how they perceive it, whether they're actually using it to sell, whether it's working for them, what works, what doesn't. That's internal form of market intelligence, but it can give you the ability to adjust the campaign going forward. So having given you a perspective of the campaign framework and a quick walkthrough, what we'd like to do now is to talk a little bit about budgeting considerations within the campaign framework. And first, just look at how you might make different investments in the program families in the campaign. So just going to use the example of demand type. Here we're dealing with either selling new concepts, new paradigms, which is a new way to solve an existing problem, or an established market, a mature market where there's known buyers and known sellers. Well, if you're selling a new concept and you're the marketer and trying to figure out how you want to invest in these different program families, you might consider that if you're selling a solution to a need that buyers don't even know they have, because you're selling with a new concept, you're selling to an unrealized need, then perhaps you don't want to spend too much on reputation-based activities, because a lot of that is about buyers searching for an answer to a problem that they know they have. Well, if they don't know they have it, then maybe you don't need to be investing heavily in reputation-based activities, but you might need to be investing in demand creation to find those early adopter buyers. And you certainly need to be investing in sales enablement to give your sales organization the tools and the resources they need to educate those buyers about their unrealized need, and then that your solution can help solve their problem. So if you're planning a campaign that fits in this context, then you might want to balance the investment across these program families as such. But if you look at the other extreme, and you're down in the established market environment, well, this is the environment where you're selling a mature product or solutions into an established market. Buyers know who the vendors are. Chances are the vendors know who the buyers are. So imagine you're selling sand to cement companies. So what are the decisions that buyers make to buy products in this space? Well, it's about price. It could be about reliability. It could be about service, availability, response. There's a lot of factors that would be involved in why they might make some decisions. And so where you might want to invest in your marketing activities would be to perhaps heavily invest in sales enablement tools to give your sales team the ability to provide the return on investment resources that they need to help educate the buyer as to why they can make more money or save money making a decision to buy with you. Probably don't need to invest so heavily in demand creation in that kind of environment, because there's a good chance that you already know who the buyers are. So perhaps that's not a big area that you need to invest. But in your reputation-based activities, it probably does make sense to make sure you sustain your brand. There's awareness out there. These buyers are constantly seeing you, and they understand what it is that you can do. So here's just an example of how you might use the campaign framework to make some budgeting planning decisions. Another thing about the campaign framework is that it can help you plan the campaign so that your spending is going to vary over time. So in this particular example, we've got an allocation that's taken place between the different program families. You can see reputation is 15%, demand creation is 50% of your budget. And what can happen here is that, most marketers today are thinking about their budgets generally flat quarter to quarter, and the finance organization doesn't have any better guidance than what you did before to help figure out how much money should be allocated from quarter to quarter. But if you consider the campaign framework and the fact that you've got the opportunity to do some long-term planning, it's very possible that you could design the campaign so that you front-end load the spending in the campaign planning process, and then as you execute it, you're going to need a bigger budget in the first quarter and the second quarter, and then it might tail off over a period of time. So there's some important considerations about how budget planning takes place when you use this campaign framework, and it's always good in that interlock process to ensure that the finance organization is involved in your planning so that when it comes time for you to look to do the budget planning and to have a budget that's not just flat quarter over quarter, then they'll understand why you need that. Now, how budgeting can take place in the campaign environment is that if you're building a campaign, and this example shows one campaign, but you could actually have multiple campaigns and still manage it with an allocation approach, is that you take a certain amount of funding and you apply it to the campaign. So you can decide early on in the process that you want to proportionally allocate a set of funding to the campaign as a whole. And then you could begin to allocate that funding to the different program families. And I've shown you a couple of examples of how you might make those kinds of decisions. And the next step is to then think about how you might want to allocate those fundings within each program family across the timeline, so then across the different quarters that you want to execute. As you go through this process, you're breaking it down and you're actually getting some pretty granular pools of funding, which are actually quite a bit easier to figure out how you're going to spend when you're looking at what do I need to spend in reputation in Q1 of this campaign. So now the numbers get small enough where you can sort of think tactically about what are the things that you can do. Well, you still haven't got the money to the people that are actually going to spend it. So there's a bottom-up approach to matching this budget planning process. And so what we look at is allocating the funding to the different ways in which funding is spent. So the example that we're going to show you a little bit later on in this webinar is about how this funding gets allocated down and then allocated to what amounts to these separate cost centers that represent global development, global execution, and regional execution. Of course, in your environment, you might define a regional development budget if that's appropriate in your particular environment. But the idea here is just to be able to think about how money actually gets spent. And in a campaign context, chances are you're building things that can be used broadly across the entire campaign, and all the theaters that you're working with can use these assets. You might do execution activities that equally support all regions, all sales regions, and all territories in your organization. But then you might need to take some of the funding and execute it regionally, where it's going to be slightly different the way it might be done in France as opposed to how it might be done in the Western sales region or in Asia. And so be able to move that money into the pools where it can actually get spent from there. So part of what we're going to talk about today is how this allocation takes place and how it can map into a system that can help you manage your budgets. So what I want to do here is to show you how campaigns can be nested together. It looks like I need to go ahead and build this out so that it's not so confusing looking. And so the idea here is that you might build campaigns in a hierarchical fashion. So let's just say you've got a corporate approach where you're going to focus on marketing to the data-driven marketer. We've got this marketing operations example that we're going to use today. And you might want to build a high-level campaign that focuses on communicating the value proposition, aligning your brand, doing some thought leadership around this notion of the data-driven marketer and how you can address some of the challenges that data-driven marketers have. So you can build one campaign that's focused on seeding, so it's mostly the reputation-based activities, with perhaps some sales enablement, so you can train your sales force on the messaging and on the theme that you've put together. And then underneath that, you might have 3 segments that you target with your products and services, selling and focusing on this data-driven marketing and the range of solutions that you have that address their needs. And so you might sell into enterprise, mid-market, and small-medium business. And what we find as we look into these different segments that while it's fundamentally the same value proposition and it's fundamentally the same set of needs, they manifest themselves differently in the context of the personas that are actually doing the buying. So in the enterprise environment, you might find the CMO is fundamentally involved in the approval, so validating the need and then making the purchase decision and approving it. But then there's an operations person that might also be responsible for executing, they own the problem, they have to solve it, they're the ones that actually need the solution or the solutions that you have to offer, and so they become another persona that you're targeting. In the mid-market, you might find that there's a VP of marketing and so forth that both owns the problem and approves the purchase, and then in a small medium business, you might find somebody else has a slightly different set of job responsibilities, but fundamentally is the buyer and the approver at the same time. So what we can begin to do is to define these different persona across the segments that you want to take for your campaign. And in each of those segments, you can build a separate campaign that has all 5 of the job types in it. And one of the things that's interesting about this, you begin to use and reuse the same content for each of these different segments. So let's take a look at how these persona begin to fall out as you analyze the overall environment that you're selling into. You can now create what we call a persona map. And so as you've defined these different sub-campaigns, you've got a high-level campaign that's focused on the data-driven marketer at the high level, and then you've got sub-campaigns that are focused on these different persona across their particular segments. So you've got enterprise, small, medium, mid-market, and small, medium business, and you define a different set of persona in that environment. So now you can begin to do some really effective planning around how you want to build content and how you want to begin to think about the tactics that you're going to execute in this environment. So as a campaign planner, you've now got a tool to think about how you want to build out the campaign, what's going to fit in the different types of tactics you're going to run, and how you're going to target them. So from a budgeting planning perspective, what you can now do is take the funding that you've got for the overall campaign and begin to break it out. So you might have this high-level reputation-based campaign effort that you want to focus on to carry the message forward, the reputation and the enablement part. Let's just say you've decided to pull out 15% of the overall budget to support that. And then you've got the sub-campaigns that you want to run, and within each of these areas you've decided that you're going to focus 15% of the overall budget on enterprise. Maybe enterprise is an area that you're growing into, but your strength and your history and where you drive most of your revenue is in small, medium business, and in that case you're going to focus 45% of your investment there. So what this is a planning tool to give you the ability to begin to allocate the money across the different sub-campaigns according to the business drivers that are working for you. So, just kind of to recap, in this environment, maybe you've got a strong presence in small, medium business, you've got an emerging presence in mid-market, and then an early presence in enterprise, and so you're managing your investments there a little bit differently. And then across the program allocations, you might have different dollar amounts in the different program allocation buckets depending on what you're trying to accomplish there, as we talked about with a few slides back with the way you might want to balance the different program family investments. So this budget map gives you a really powerful tool for building out the overall budget plan aligned with your campaign strategy. And one of the things that I want to share with you is perhaps a shift in the way you think about budgeting. In today's world, there's a pretty common approach to budgeting, which I call functional budgeting. And what this does is you've got this pool of funding that comes from, say a CMO, and he or she begins to allocate that funding to the different teams that exist in your environment. So you hand some funding to corporate marketing, some to partner marketing, some to field marketing, and so on and so forth. And so you end up with this functional budget allocation where each of these different teams has its own budget. Well, there's some good things about that, and one of the good things is it's relatively easy to do that. But some of the challenges that it creates is now you've created essentially these different budget silos, and to drive collaboration across these different organizations is very challenging because they've each got their own budgets. They might build their own marketing plans, and then they might have a set of activities that they want to focus on. And if what you want to do is to run a campaign that's going to cut across all these different teams, then you have to essentially get each of them to agree to contribute to the overall campaign. Well, if you take a different approach and think about funding the campaigns rather than funding the departments, then you can begin to fund the initiatives that you're really focused on driving. And so one of the things that SiriusDecisions advocates is a shift to more of a campaign-oriented approach to budgeting, so that you begin to think about the relative priorities of the campaigns, the funding that you need to drive those campaigns, and then to be able to allocate the funding to the campaigns and get the behavior from the organizations that you need. So now you're putting money into the hands of the campaign, build a campaign team that's got funding. They can drive all the activities that need to take place. And you can then begin to push that money out to the different regions and get them to execute the campaigns in the way that you want them to, rather than putting money in the hands of the regions and then asking them to support the campaigns as you define them at corporate. So that's a quick overview of the campaign framework and a look at how the budgeting process can align to this overall campaign framework. So what I'd like to do now is turn it back over to Richard and take you through how Allocadia aligns to this campaign framework and can make this real.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Greg. Okay, so before I get started, I just wanted to give everybody a very quick introduction to what Allocadia is and what we do, for those of you that aren't familiar with us. So Allocadia is a marketing budgeting software solution designed for enterprise marketers, whether you've got a marketing team of 10 people or hundreds of people. Allocadia is designed to make it easy to managing the budgeting process. When we think about the budgeting process, we're really thinking about sort of the life cycle of a marketing dollar, from helping with marketing planning, which obviously relates very much with what Craig's been talking about today, through managing spend, so managing those marketing investments as money gets spent on different tactics, and then ultimately tracking the contribution that marketing has been able to make through those investments by capturing and then reporting marketing ROI. So that's what Allocadia is designed to do. So I'm going to be jumping into a live demo of our solution in a couple of minutes. And what I'll be covering is defining a campaign hierarchy. So thinking about the campaign framework and how Allocadia solution can help with the campaign hierarchy, setting budget targets, and then aligning spend back to corporate goals, and then finally measuring ROI on your spend. So as a quick recap, I'm going to keep on going with sort of the example scenario that Craig's been talking to. So to recap, that's a B2B high-tech organization. This year they're going into an adjacent market. So they're going to be focusing their spend a little on demand creation and reputation for particular segments. So we've got a high-level overarching corporate campaign called the Data-Driven Marketer, and sub-campaigns that are based on segments, enterprise, mid-market, and SMB. We also allocate budget functionality across the organization by global and regional hierarchy. So you'll see that as I go through the demo, we're going to be sort of going down sort of from the top down, sort of strategic campaign-centric allocations, and then enabling individual budget owners to go and do a sort of a bottoms-up planning approach to go and meet those allocations. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into the Allocadia solution now. Okay, so I've logged into Allocadia. It's a cloud solution, so it runs in any web browser. So here we're showing what we call the marketing organizational hierarchy on the left-hand side here. This is an easily configurable hierarchy to match your marketing organizational structure. So you can set up, so in the example we've got here, we've got our campaign hierarchy at the top here, and then sort of our organizational hierarchy below that. You can set up access rights to varying levels of the hierarchy, so that each of your marketing, so each person in the marketing organization only sees what they need to. So if you come over here, you can see that we've got an America's program budget. Megan Smith, and I'm logged in as Megan for this demo, is the owner of that budget, but she's been able to share information about that budget with a whole group of other stakeholders. So one of the fundamental principles from our perspective with budget management is it really should be a collaborative process, all about enabling people that own budgets to do their own planning and spend management, and enabling sort of quick communication of what's happening in a budget. You can also set budget currencies so that your organization can plan in the local currencies, but you still end up with a roll-up back to your global currency, and that happens automatically. So in the hierarchy, you can define both the campaign hierarchy, so we have our campaign hierarchy here, as well as the functional hierarchy for the bottoms-up plan. So let's start by looking at how we define a campaign hierarchy and set a campaign quarterly allocation. So I'm going to go and click now on the go-to budget for campaign hierarchy. Okay, so what we see here is the main input area in Allocadia. It's designed to be very Excel-like. It really helps with uptake of the solution. People are familiar with Excel. You can go and click on any of the cells and go and make edits as you're working in the solution. But Allocadia is taking care of the math that's required, so there's no maintaining formulas in an Excel spreadsheet. And these individual budgets are sort of contained and managed within hierarchy that manages kind of the roll-up. So that's really part of the benefit of Allocadia. So to the left here, you can see our campaign hierarchy. So the hierarchy includes our top-level corporate goal, which was the data-driven marketer, and sub-campaigns by segment. So we have enterprise, mid-market, and SMB here. To the right, you can see quarterly campaign allocations by program family. So what we've basically done here is taken the percentage allocations that Craig had in his example, and we've basically split the budget to give us quarterly investments, both from a sort of a global allocation perspective and then also a functional and segment allocation basis. So this exactly mirrors sort of the budget map slide that Craig presented and then I summarized during the recap. So again, as a reminder, the reason you want to be allocating by campaign is to align your teams in terms of messaging that's being communicated and improving efficiency across all of your teams. So your percentage allocations will also reflect your distribution of investments across program families as it relates to what environment you're operating and how your spend should be invested over time. So Craig had a slide where spend was sort of being mapped sort of period by period, and we're doing the same thing here in Allocadia. So we have our spend for our 4 quarters here with a total. Okay, so we've now defined campaign hierarchy. We've set our top-down campaign allocations. So in a parallel stream, let's now see how these allocations by our global and regional hierarchy can be sort of planned in detail with a detailed bottoms-up plan that sort of builds up towards these allocations. So to do that, we're going to go back to the Home tab in Allocadia. So let's look at how we've set these allocations for global field regions, including the Americas and EMEA. So these allocations would typically be done by an operations, a marketing operations, or a finance team. So in our example here, we have a finance top-level budget. So we're going to look at field marketing and click here. You can see that we have a finance top-level investment target of $12 million spread quarter on quarter. This is a finance. This is a target that's been given to us by the finance team. We also have a global target down here, adding up to $4 million. And we can further break this down by cost center. So if we go and look at the Americas program budget, we can see that on this specific budget, we have a target here of, so we're actually varying the amount we're spending by quarter. So we start at $1.5 million for Q1, same for Q2, drop it back down to $1 million for Q3, and then up a little bit to $1.25 million for Q4. And to note, with Allocadia, you can do this at any level of the hierarchy. You can lock these target amounts down. You can also easily reallocate from one part of the hierarchy to another part of the hierarchy. So we've now completed the investment allocations by campaign, which is the first part that I showed you. We've now done this also by region. So you can now see that Allocadia can facilitate the strategic hierarchical approach of investment allocation. So now let's look at how people who actually spend against these investment buckets actually do so. To see this, we must first show how the execution team will define tactics in an associated plan. So for an example, I'm going to be clicking into the Americas program budget here. I'm just going to change our view. Look at our quarterly plan. Okay, so here, this is an individual budget. This was the budget that I looked at earlier that's owned by Megan, our marketing director. And we can see that our budget owner here has built out a plan that's been grouped by program family. And then individual tactics. So for example, here we have under demand creation, we have white paper, webcast, trial, for example. And this is a very simple example. This can be built out to be obviously kind of as complex as need be. And we'll often see marketers really, mapping everything right down to, ultimately every single line item of spend. So a great deal of resolution can be managed through this approach. So this is really enabling the marketer to go and build sort of their personal marketing plan for the bit of the budget that's been allocated to them, back up, bottoms up from the things that they're actually going to be focusing on. As you're building this plan up quarter by quarter, at any point you can also go and look at how much you have left to plan. So this is showing us, what's the gap between the bottoms up plan that we're building and the amount that's been allocated to us through the campaign allocation process. So you're really marrying up sort of these two different approaches, sort of meeting in the middle. The next thing we can do is go and tag and sort of associate individual tactics back to campaign allocations through tagging. So I'm going to show you that in a moment. This hierarchy has been built up using the Add Program button and the Add Tactic button. So Allocadia is able to change button labels just based on the language that you're using internally in your organization. I'm going to go ahead now and open up details or tactic detail for our webcast tactic here. So on the details panel, the user can go and tag information and go and align or go and communicate why they're spending, what the rationale is. So fields can be made mandatory. So here we have a program and segment made mandatory so that we can go and plug these individual tactics and sort of associate these individual tactics with our campaign. Other fields can also be entered. This is all completely configurable. So here we have a type for the type of event. We can go and allocate the reason that we're by product or we're making this investment, and put start dates and end dates in here as well. You may have also noticed at the top here we have Salesforce campaign name. This enables us to go and associate either a line item or a part of your budget back to a campaign in Salesforce. And this is ultimately going to give us closed loop ROI visibility. Okay, so let's imagine now that we've completed our plan. So my plan's been locked down, it's been approved by whoever needs to review and approve the budget. Now we can go and actually manage and execute against this plan. So to do that, Allocadia has really an unlimited number of views. I'm going to go and jump now into a Q1 view. So imagine that I'm now managing spend. I've got my Q1 plan that's been locked down. As I start executing against this plan, I'll be able to forecast where I think I'm going to come in, and I can go and add more line items if I've still got some room to plan. I can go and tag spend based on sort of where that spend is in sort of the life cycle of the marketing dollar. So is it still something that's forecast? Is it being committed? Has it actually occurred? Or is it an item that we've got in the plan as optional? So there's a little bit of wiggle room there. What Allocadia is also doing here is we're able to pull in actuals data from your ERP system. So Allocadia includes a smart rules-based mechanism for pulling in actual spend data from the finance system and applying that to the right level in the budget hierarchy. So you ultimately, right down to the line item, can get visibility into what was planned and what's actually been spent as measured by the finance team. So you get a much quicker, really a real-time view of where you are from a spend perspective. Okay, so now that we've have all of our critical operational data in the system, we're able to go and view metrics. So the final element, I'm going to go and jump into the Analytics tab in Allocadia. Okay, so I'm starting off on the plan tab here. So during the planning phase, we could use this analytics view to get a sort of an overall global visibility into how much of your sort of target allocations have actually been planned in detail by the marketing team. And imagine, if you're trying to do this with, potentially hundreds of marketers spread around the globe, getting this kind of real-time visibility into what actually has been planned so far. Without a system like Allocadia, it's phenomenally difficult to do. So we can see here that we've got $16 million of target to be spent. Currently, the sum of all of our plans are adding up to $13 million. So we've got $2.7 million left to plan. So we're getting quite close to the end of our planning cycle. That equates to about 17% left to actually get to plan completion. We can view these figures quarter by quarter. We can view them by campaign type versus plan by program. We can go and look at what were our sort of our planned allocations by segment, and then go and look at actually how's our plan looking by segment. So if we go and look for SMB, for example, we were planning to spend $6.5 million on SMB. We go and find SMB over here. Currently, we only actually have $1 million of budget planned. And with each of these reports, you're also able to drill in. So if you want to go and find out, for example, get more sort of resolution into what America's field have got planned so far, we can drill down here. I'm not going to do that now because we're getting a little bit tight on time. You can also see here what's our quarter by quarter sort of plan versus target. So for Q1, we can see that we're a little under. Q3 and Q4's spot on from a plan perspective. Okay, so I'm going to jump across now to the Actuals tab. So when Actuals start coming in other words, you're starting to actually execute on this plan, we have a similar view looking at your overall plan versus Actuals to ensure that you're not over or underspending. So one of the benefits with Allocadia is we see marketing teams able to execute with a great deal more accuracy and precision than they typically have in the past. Partly this is because the planning process becomes more detailed, more productive. It's also because we're connecting actual spend back to the plan, so you can see as you're zeroing in on your actual original plan where you are from an actual perspective. And again, we're able to see breakdowns by quarter. We can see where we are from a spend perspective month on month. We're able to see where we are in terms of program family in the dashboard here, and we're also able to see where we are from a plan and actual perspective by functional area as well. So we can get a really good idea of how different parts of the organization are performing. And of course, if you do need to replan based on performance or changing objectives during a period, you have visibility to see who's got some budget potentially that could be reallocated. Okay, so the final thing I wanted to show you very quickly is the ROI tab in Allocadia. So Allocadia comes with 50 out-of-the-box reports and dashboards. As soon as you start using the system, you can also build, and we can help you build customized dashboards that make sense for your business. So the ROI dashboard here gives you global visibility into what's happening and really what revenue marketing is driving based on investments. So in our example here, we're looking at $5 million of marketing investment. Because we're able to track by integrating to marketing automation systems and CRM systems, we're able to look at what demand is being created right through the funnel until we ultimately have visibility into what's the opportunity one value, giving us a marketing ROI value on revenue that we can go and attribute back to marketing and a marketing contribution. Okay, so I'm just going to jump back to our PowerPoint slides now. Okay, so just to wrap up, a few key takeaways that I drew out of, I think particularly Craig's presentation here. So the first thing that really struck me was the need to sort of think about campaigns the right way. So campaigns are not, dozens and dozens of, glorified marketing tactics. A campaign is based on a buyer's need. It's a long-term initiative, and it's integrating multiple functions via what we call interlocks. Campaign comprises 4 key program families: reputation, demand creation, sales enablement, and market intelligence. And we can really start using those to think about sort of associated tactics as we go through the budgeting process. So an allocation approach to budgeting is really where sort of the rubber hits the road. So it's providing the fuel to energize campaigns. Ultimately, money needs to get down to the people that are actually going to go and own individual campaigns and make tactics happen. And then finally, Allocadia is able to combine both the top-down campaign allocation approach with a bottom-up sort of detailed planning and execution approach, as well as obviously the ROI piece that I showed you at the end there. Okay, so we have a few minutes now for Q&A. If anybody has any questions, please type them into the GoToMeeting interface now. I'm just going to open that up so I can see the questions as well. Okay, so the first question is one that I'd like to pose to Craig. So Craig, the question was, what challenges do organizations face adopting the campaign framework? And do you have any thoughts on how to overcome them?
Well, thanks, Richard. One of the biggest challenges that organizations have about implementing a campaign framework is really gaining alignment across the different functional areas within the company. And the biggest challenge to implement that is to put together a team of people that collaborate across the different functions. You need to gain alignment between the product organization, sales, and the different parts of the marketing organization to make them happen. It's really hard to do one in isolation because fundamentally they require participation from the different parts of the organization. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, and we find that helping companies go through that process, a lot of it is educating different parts of the organization about the campaign framework. Fundamentally, it's a reasonable concept. It's not too complex or too academic to make sense. It really does make sense. It's just getting everyone to sort of understand what the terminology is and get them to work together to collaborate on building these needs-based campaigns.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Greg. So another question was actually a couple of sort of Allocadia questions that I'll try and answer. So the first one was who in an organization would typically use Allocadia? So that's an easy question to answer. As many people as possible would be the obvious answer. But in all seriousness, we see organizations get the most value when really anybody that is involved in sort of the budget management process, or who owns a budget, or who cares about how budgets are being spent, when they have access to either build budgets or edit budgets or just view budgets, we see sort of increasing value. So we do see with some of our customers up to about 85% of global marketing team members ending up with access to Allocadia, as well as some of their colleagues in groups. If sales enablement is outside of marketing, we see users there, as well as colleagues in the finance team as well. We haven't talked about accruals, but that's something else that Allocadia can help with. So it definitely helps with sort of some of the integration between finance and marketing teams. Another question that came in was a bit of a detailed product one, which I'll answer quickly. So on the analytics tab, if you want to see original budget versus plan versus forecast in one tab, so that we can see how we're tracking, so that's a monthly forecast in our case, can Allocadia do that? Sort of paraphrasing the question a little bit. So yes, the answer is yes. I only touched on a couple of sort of high-level reports and dashboards in Allocadia, but we can absolutely show that visibility on a monthly basis. So yeah, short answer is yes. we'd be happy to show you that. So Craig, another question for you. What's the best way to get started with the campaign framework? Does it need to be a big bang, or can you start small?
Well, organizations that implement the campaign framework do it from one of two perspectives. And, one is that there's a group of people within the organization that identify the fact that they'd like to implement a campaign, but they don't necessarily want to transform the entire organization. And in those kinds of circumstances, we recommend taking a pilot approach. So it's a matter of finding what we call a coalition of the willing. So maybe there's a product group or a business unit that would like to work with the marketing team to have some focus on their initiatives, and then to find the corollary and sales that can work together, so to build out that pilot. Sometimes when organizations go through some significant change, or there's a new leader in place, then taking a whole process on and transforming the marketing organization as a whole is a reasonable approach. And so we've seen that in many cases too. It's more complex, and it takes some real strong sponsorship to make that happen, but the result is in a relatively short period of time, and relatively short being, year and a half or so, maybe 2 years, a couple of cycles of this. Then they've got a completely different outlook on the way they approach the marketing challenges. So there's two approaches. It really depends on the scale that you can absorb in your organization.
That's great, thank you. It's interesting that very much mirrors the way that people deploy Allocadia as well. Sometimes we'll start with sort of a relatively small deployment in a single region, and we'll grow out of there. Once sort of that pilot deployment's been proven. Other times, an organization will just decide that it's a global strategic initiative to improve the budgeting and planning process, and they'll go for a big bang and deploy across the entire organization at once. So quite similar. So another we've got time maybe for 2 more questions. So question that I'll answer, do you need to deploy Allocadia at the beginning of a budgeting planning cycle? It's a really good question. So the answer is no. It's certainly nice if you can, but we're able to, if you've been planning in other ways, for example, using spreadsheets, we're able to help organizations, essentially bring those plans into Allocadia. We're also able to adapt organizational hierarchies as well. So, we often see organizations that start with one sort of organizational view, and then adapt based on changing business needs or restructuring. Changing sort of the way that Allocadia is being configured for a particular customer, the system is quite adaptable. So you can certainly start using the system sort of partway through a financial cycle. And then the last question I'll pose to you, Craig, was one that I've wondered before as well. How many simultaneous campaigns do companies typically manage using the campaign framework?
Well, imagine a situation where you've got a company that's got 30 or 50 products, and each product owner wants its own campaign for that product. I mean, that's where we find lots of companies today. And, the idea is to try to transform that and essentially pivot it to the core buyer's needs. And what we find is that when you go from many product campaigns to a few needs-based campaigns, you're going from, the 10s, 20s, and so forth into maybe 5. It could be a relatively small number. It sort of depends on how you want to break it down. And if you're going to target by industry, then you might have different industry-oriented campaigns around the individual need. But the number is going to come down to a handful. So, it depends on the environment and the scale. But again, it should be, maybe an order of magnitude less, but at least, substantially less. A sixth or so of the kinds of product campaigns that you might be running today.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so it just remains for me to thank you very much, Craig, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Having you present with us. I know from a personal perspective, I love this sort of campaign-centric approach. I've got a background as a marketer, and I've certainly grappled with, sort of the best way to think about budgets and to sort of organize marketing teams sort of around the right things. And the campaign framework just feels right. As you understand it, it just feels like I think often when things feel obvious, it's because they are the right thing to be doing. So really appreciate you joining us and sharing that with us. also like to thank everybody who's joined us on the webinar today. It's been a very popular session. I forgot to say at the beginning of the presentation, we have recorded the session today. So a little later on today, we'll send you out all an email with a link to the recording and access to the slides. So if you want to review anything that we've discussed or share the session today with any of your colleagues, you're absolutely welcome to do that. And in terms of the next step, if you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out to me. My details are on the screen at the moment. Or contact Allocadia through any of the channels that are on our website. And also, if you just want to have a play around with the system and see what it feels like, you can sign up for a free trial, one of the benefits of being a cloud solution. So you can go to allocadia.com/30 days free trial with dashes in between, as you can see on the screen there. And start using the system and see whether you think it might work for your organization. So thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.